Thank you. Thank you for that meditation. What we're going to be talking about this morning is sweeping over my soul. Now, when I started putting together the series of messages that we were going to have in April, which was in January, I picked up the book, The Enoch Factor. And The Enoch Factor is a book written by David McSwain, Steve McSwain, and he is an adjunct professor at the University of Kentucky in religious work and theology. And he is still a Christian minister, but he had an outlook a little different on it, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. Now, Enoch is in the Bible. It's in the Hebrew Scriptures. You may not even know who he is, because there are, in the Hebrew Scriptures, two verses dedicated to his life. And then there's one in Hebrews where Paul gives us a little bit of idea from his interpretation of Enoch and the Enoch factor. In Genesis 5:23 it says, "So all the days of Enoch were 365 years." That's a long time to live. And I'm not aspiring to that. But Enoch did have a son whose name was Methuselah, and he lived to be the oldest person in the Bible, 900 and some years. Now that's the first verse. The second verse says, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." And I said, well, I wonder what that means. So in Hebrews 11:5, it says, "By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God." Another translation says that he walked with God. Now in the book, there's a chapter called "The Mastery of the Sacred Art of Knowing God." And I thought, well, that's really a cool title. I don't know what it means, but it's a cool title. And so I'm going to use it. And so I put that down. And then as I started to look at it, I said, what's the sacred art of knowing God? And then I started to look at it and say, what is the art of walking with God? Walking with God. Because what we know is that we learn to know God. We learn to become aware of God. We learn to be in the presence. But oftentimes we don't really take the time to learn to walk with God moment by moment, hour by hour, situation by situation, crisis by crisis, emotional change by emotional change. Because we awaken to God, but we forget that we have much further to go on the journey. And today I want to talk a little bit about that journey. The word Enoch, by the way, metaphysically means one who walks in spiritual consciousness. And in Hebrew, the name means instructor, teacher, initiator. So he's a good example. Carl Jung says, he who looks outside dreams, he who looks outside dreams, that's the way I want to say it, and he who looks within awakes. And I'm talking about that awakening process. And so to help us out this morning, I have my friend Eckhart Tolle, who is going to talk about oneness to ego to oneness. Let's listen to it.
Before we say goodbye, let's come up with about the core of the ego. Knowing who you really are means...
The core of the ego. The ego, yes, sometimes we look at it as if it were an entity, but really it's just a form of unconsciousness. It appears to be an entity sometimes.
Being in touch with
it is not
being,
threatening, never regarded as an enemy or something that you need to get rid of. It's only to be recognized for what it is.
The identifications that
and then the ego has fulfilled its purpose. It has taken you to that point of awakening.
But if you say I am and add
in order to awaken, humans have
practice. It can get you in
were
touch
in the state of oneness with the source
I am not
when they first came here.
I am.
And then they lost themselves. They lost themselves in thinking. They lost themselves in the mind. They lost themselves in the ego.
So powerful.
And
And then they reach the stage where this state of being lost produces so much suffering that this dream of life becomes a nightmare.
In fact, don't look for any answer, especially not on the level of mind. Who am
so
I?
as we wake up, we regain
the question. Don't look
for the state that we once had, we lost the state of oneness with life, oneness
So we're waking up now.
Oneness with the source. But when we regain it as a deeper level because we are conscious.
And just be with that.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you. And so for whether it's an addiction or an eating disorder or...
All of us are on a journey. And I think everybody sitting here started off as a little baby. That's my guess. Okay? And you know, about the first 3 months of your birth, you really didn't know the difference between oneness and separation. Everything was one to you. As you laid in that crib, and I don't remember these days, but I've watched it, there's no sense of separation. It just is what is. And that's spirit. That's the oneness, I think, that Eckhart Tolle's talking about there. And as we move into the world, as we grow, we start to understand that we can depend, supposedly, on the ego. We need the ego. We need the ego to tell us when we're hungry and how to react so we get fed. We need the ego to tell us that we are safe within certain circumstances or not safe under certain circumstances. We need the ego to help us get to kindergarten, if you would, okay, and take our first step to get on the bus if you ride a bus to kindergarten. I did. To take that first step, in other words, to move forward and to move through life. And as we grow, we become dependent on the ego because that's what's worked for us. That's what we understand. That's what we've come to know. And so eventually what happens is we are walking life with the ego. Now the ego has no power except what we give it. And we give it power because we think we can depend upon it. But you know, at some point, for each and every person I've ever met, and for some it's at 10 years old, and for some it's at 16, and for some it's at 50, and for some it's at 60, we start to hunger and thirst for something more. All the things that we've depended on just aren't doing the job for us. And so we start to look outside of ourselves once again for the answers because that's where they've been in the past. But we come to understand over time that anything temporary cannot fill that hunger and that thirst. That we are hungry for spiritual understanding. We are hungry for spiritual strength. We are hungry because we want to come back and become what we started off as. We want to be one with the Christ presence, is what we call it here in Unity. And we start to learn over time that we can go within. And that's true with many paths to God. We start to go within, and when we do, we meet with the I am. We start to experience in some kind of way and be awakened to the source of our beingness, the source of who and what we are, spiritual beings. And when we start to do that, we start to connect with it, and we start to awaken to our journey. We start to understand how challenging it can be at times to let go of the ego, especially when it's not in our best interest. There was a minister in Unity, Don Jennings, who used to say, the ego makes a great master. The ego makes a lousy master and a great servant. A lousy master and a great servant. And how true that is. Because when the ego is the master, we live in fear. When the ego is the servant, it helps us to continue to take on the challenges of life in a positive, loving, and caring way. There's nothing wrong with the ego unless we allow it to become our master. And as we grow, we start to understand in some kind of way, we start to feel and experience the power of divine mind. We start to really believe that there's only one presence and one power in our lives. And that is God, the good omnipotence. And that as we understand that, our lives are transformed. But we quite, as we move along, it's the beginning of the journey when we awaken, not the end of the journey. And some people, because, there is an emotional aspect to it, there's a feel-good aspect to it, I've discovered, kind of stop there. But we need to continue the journey. We need to continue to move forward so that not only do we understand there's divine mind, but there's a divine idea of who and what we are as children of God. Not only a divine idea, but there is a divine expression of who and what we are. And it shows through us through the power of Spirit. And as we do that, what happens is we begin to experience the kingdom of God. That's what Jesus talked about. The kingdom of God is within you. And that's where we have to learn. And so as we start on this journey, we can kind of look back and see, how did Jesus do this? How did he work his journey? And most of us know that after he was baptized, that Spirit called him to the wilderness. It wasn't the ego that called him to the wilderness. It was Spirit that called him to the wilderness. Because Spirit understood, and Jesus was coming to understand, that there was work to be done, and he had to make some difficult choices. And there are two of those experiences in the wilderness that I want to center on this morning in Jesus' journey. What he really had to do was decide whether his life was going to be one of the ego, or was his life going to be one of walking with what he called the Father. And so, as the story goes, it says that Jesus was driven by Spirit into the wilderness, literally driven. Eckhart Tolle says that life or spirit, whichever you want to call it, will lead you to whatever experience you need for the evolution of your consciousness. Now, if you answer that and surrender right away, you see the experience will be kind of mild. But if you decide you're going to resist that, it gets tougher. And if you continue to resist, it even gets tougher. Because what you're doing is continue to look outside for the answers, and all of a sudden you realize life is empty that way. And you want to step into the experience of God. You're looking for that. You are hungering for that. Now, in order to walk with God, we must erase the perceptions of the ego and experience on a daily basis the truth of the I am. We must face our temptations and overcome the resistance of the ego to keep us asleep. That's what the ego wants to do, keep us asleep at the wheel. And sometimes we become comatose because of the ego. And sometimes we get to the point that we are unaware of the power within us. But like I said, the blessing of grace is always something inside saying, you need more. There's something inside of you where you'll find the answer. Look inside, look inside, look inside. Go within. Now, the first temptation Jesus had was to turn the stone to bread. His ego said, hey, a lot of stones around. If you turn it into bread, people are going to be happy. People are going to love it. They'll know you are the Savior. They'll know you are the guy. Kind of a nice temptation. Because all of us want to feed the world. All of us want to see no hunger in the world. But it's deeper than that. When you want to turn the stone into bread, if that's what you really want to do, what happens is you are trying to get the answer from the outside. You are trying to fill the hunger in your heart from the outside rather than going within. It is the power of materialism that many times we want to seek and we want to hold on to. Whereas if we release that ego nature we can start that walk with God. But we have to see the ego as the ego is. Here are 5 ways in which we see the ego working. Number 1, the ego is a false understanding of reality. What we have to remember is that which is real is not seen, but unseen. Anything we see is temporary. The second thing is the ego lives life at the surface level of existence. It's subsistence. It is struggle. It is, I want more. I'm never happy. The ego is fear. And so we live in the fear that we're not going to have enough and there's not enough to go around and that we have to create things for ourselves through the power of the ego in order to survive. You see, we focus on existence and not on living life abundantly. Number 3, look outside for the happiness we can only find inside. That's what the ego says. Look out there. This will fix you. This will take care of you. That person will do the job for you. That religion will give you the answer. And you can just relate to that and you'll be fine. But if I look outside for religion, then I'm going to find an empty void because I have to go inside to find my faith and to create my religion, if you would. The ego also says, if you live an ego-driven life, then everything's going to be fine. And yet what we know is that things are fine when we live a God-centered life. And the other one is, and I mentioned it briefly, seek a religion outside of yourself. That's what the ego wants us to do. To buy into the dogma, to buy into what people tell us we ought to believe, instead of examining it. And it says we look outside for religion, but we look inside for a relationship with God. All right? Who said that? Say it again. All right. Thank you. You see, what it's really saying is that we have to awaken to God and let go and release the insanity of the ego. The ego is insane because it says that which is temporary is going to take care of you forever. Now, there's nobody in here who would sign an agreement to that effect. So what we have to do is release that. Now, the second idea and the second temptation that Jesus had, cast yourself off this pinnacle, the ego said, and let the angels rescue you. Let God take care of you. Put him to the test. Put the Father, the Father, put him to the test. Because the Scripture says the angels will take care of you. So let's make sure. Why don't you just jump and make sure? And, it'd been quite a spectacle, too. People would hear about something like that. If somebody jumped off of a large pinnacle, off of a mountain today, or off of a cliff, went down 100 feet, and on the way some angels caught them and just quilted them down, okay, I think that would make the news, maybe. Right? And so that's kind of what the ego was saying to Jesus. Use your powers in a different way, but make sure God is with you before you take this journey. In Unity, we really do spend a lot of time talking about getting rid of the past. How many people have worked on it? Getting rid of the past. Anybody here? Yeah, Well, 2 of you are already healed. But anyway, that's okay. And then the second thing we do is we start to learn about, to get rid of the past, we have to be in the present. And we don't want to bring the past into the present. We let go of it, and we're in this present moment. And when we're in this present moment, we then can be a witness to who and what we are. We then can feel who we are. And oftentimes we find out what we have to do to change in the present moment. And so we release more of the past. But there's another piece that I want you to think about this morning. I want you to take this home with you. That we also have to release the future. And that is really hard. Boy, that is hard for me. I came up and I was trained to be a planner. And you didn't do anything until you got your plan written. And I was fortunate to have a guy who used to read my plans, and he was so objective that it just irritated the heck out of me. You know? But he taught me a lot. I used to have salesmen come in, and the year before, let's just say, this is back in the 70s, they made a decent income, say $30,000, but they wanted to make $100,000. So what they do is they write a $100,000 plan. And I would look at it, and here's what he taught me to do, and I'd say, based on your activity, based on the results you had last year, you're going to have to work 80 hours a week to make $100,000 a year. How realistic is that? If you do the same things that you were doing last year. And if you change, if you grow, if you change some techniques, if you do something a little differently, and we need to find out what those are, then you might reach the $100,000 threshold. But it's not going to happen by repeating just more and more of what you were doing and just increasing the level, in some case, of failure. It doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. We have to make a change. We have to say, okay, fine, how am I going to meet my goal? But we don't do it by planning. And I know, we do it eventually by planning, but please don't go away and say, Richard says you should never plan. Lordy. Might find a new job next week, okay? Have to. But anyway, we do our planning. But what we need to do first is to let go of the future and trust that the future will take care of itself because I am walking with God. If I get rid of my past and I'm in the present and I think I'm going to plan my future, I'm not walking with God, I'm letting God walk with me. And there's a difference between the two. If I had listened to ego, Vicki and I would not be here this morning. Richmond, Virginia was the last city in the United States that I wanted to return to. The truth. It's the truth. And we had applied at 5 churches. And there were 5 churches well above Richmond that I wanted to go to, okay? I thought. That's what I thought as I was in my head and in my ego. And then one day, some of you have heard this, we're sitting downstairs in our study at Unity Village, and Vicki says, we ought to apply at Unity of Richmond. They're open. I said, we're not going to Richmond. But I caught myself. And she said, oh, but we had an agreement that if one of us wanted to apply at a church, the other one would do it. And I remembered that. And so the next morning when I got up, remembering that, I sent by email our application in and had it passed on to Unity of Richmond. Because Vicki said we ought to try it. She came back on Wednesday and said, oh, by the way, you're right, we shouldn't go to Richmond. And I said, well, it's too late now. And if we're not supposed to go, we won't go. Obviously, we came here. I want to tell you that we came here when we had a checklist. The checklist said, is the boiler in good shape? No. The checklist said, do they have ample seating? No. The checklist says, do they have a large fellowship hall? No. The checklist said they have plenty of room for the kids? No. I mean, we had a checklist that was 99% no. Are you supposed to go there? Yes. That was the only question that had any importance. We weren't asking God to paint for us a picture of the future. We were simply walking with God into the future. And that's what I want you to be able to do. And we do that through that power of the I am, through the power of Spirit, through the power of our ability to change our lives through Spirit. Here's what Eckhart Tolle talks about when he talks about a summary of the I am. Listen to these words.
So before we say goodbye, let's sum up what we've covered.
So what did you want to say in conclusion about the core of the ego?
The core of the ego, sometimes we look at it as if it were an entity, but really it's just a form of unconsciousness. It appears to be an entity.
Being in touch with being, the being that you are. To sense the I am
that is the essence of your identity, when you remove all the identifications that usually you say, after you say I am, you say what you are.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say I am and add nothing to it, that is a good practice. It can get you in touch with the essence. I am not this, I am not that, I am. As a simple meditation, repeat the words I am to yourself.
It's so powerful. I started to do that. It is so powerful when you do that.
And don't fill in the blank after the words.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Another similar one is, who am I? It's a question, but don't look to the mind for an answer. In fact, don't look for any answer, especially not on the level of mind. Who am I? And then allow the stillness to be there after the question. Don't look for an answer. And in not looking for an answer, there's the answer, but it's not a mental concept, as a sensing, feeling.
I am.
Yes, I am.
And just be with that.
Yes.
Yes. And so for whether it's an addiction or an eating disorder or nothing, you think you have a really wonderful life, but you are connected to all the things in your life, to the content of your life. Yes. Just being able to sit with yourself and to say those words to yourself, I am.
It's wonderfully liberating.
And to recognize them, to know them.
Yes.
Like honey.
Yes.
To know them.
That's right.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Doesn't that feel good? We had some friends over the other evening, and one of the things that we had in common is that when we were very young, we belonged to the same organization, and we ended up at Branches Baptist Church on occasion. And Carol asked us if we remember anything that took place at Branches Baptist Church, and I said, it's going to be a surprise, but I do. I don't know who the guy was. I don't know what his name was. I don't know who the minister was, but I remember what he said. He said, you are not what you think you are. You are what you think. It took me years to figure that out. I think that's why it stayed there. What does that mean? You see? Say this with me. Just say, I am, and stop right there. I am together. I am. One more time. I am. And then a last time. I am. You don't have to put anything else with it. No matter what the world's told you, no matter what religion has told you, no matter what anybody, you don't have to put anything else with it. There is a story in The Power of Now about a beggar that Eckhart Tolle wrote about. And he said this beggar was sitting on this corner for well over 30 years. And as he was sitting there, people would walk by, and of course he would ask for support. A few pennies, please. Do you have any quarters to spare? And one day a stranger walked by, who had never walked by before. The guy put his baseball hat and he said, do you have a little bit of change to spare? The stranger looked at him and said, no, I don't have anything of that nature to give you because it won't do you any good. The guy kind of looked at him, kind of shrugged his shoulders, and the stranger walked off. He came back the next day and the same thing happened. And the next day he came back and he said to the stranger, please, today, give me something. And the stranger says, I don't have anything on the outside to give you. But you've been sitting on a box. How long have you been sitting on that box? He said, well, I've been sitting on this box for about 5 years. The others were worn out. What's in the box? He said, oh, I don't know. I've never looked inside. I just sit on the box. He said, well, how do you know there's not something inside that will help you? Oh, there's nothing in this box, believe me. And so, in this parable, the stranger says, please open the box just for me so I'll know what's inside. And when he opened the box, there was this piece of gold, a gold bar, which was plenty. You see, he had been sitting on that which he needed. Sometimes we sit on that which is within us. And so when we, like that beggar, listen to the stranger within us, and sometimes it feels like a stranger, when we go inside, we will find all the gold that we need in the way of peace, in the way of joy, in the way of love. And it all will come to us in some mystical manner so that we trust not only letting go of the past, not only being in the present, but letting go of the future. When we're able to do that, you see, we're able to walk with God. We're able to experience God, as I said, from moment to moment, from hour to hour, from day to day. And when things happen in our lives, we know how to go to God, in a sense. And what I mean is to go within and find Spirit to help guide us through whatever we are challenged with in a moment, the opportunity that awaits us. Don't be like the beggar, begging for subsistence. Be like the stranger who said, look inside, and you will find everything that you need in this life. God bless you and thank you.